Greetings, everyone. As the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto, I welcome you all to today's session of the Zoroastrian Studies Seminar Series, featuring our distinguished colleague, Professor Antonio Panaino of the University of Bologna, who is speaking on two mental dimensions of evil in Zoroastrianism. We are grateful to Professor Panaino for accepting our invitation to speak in this series. I also thank my colleagues, Professor Enrico Raffaelli and Professor Miguel Angel Toledo, for convening the series. Additionally, we would like to extend our special thanks to our collaborators, the Federation of Zoroastrian Associations of North America and Zoroastrian Society of Ontario, and the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute. Before introducing our speaker, I want to express our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge the land where the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies is located. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many indigenous communities from across Turtle Island, and we are thankful for the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral land. My colleague, Miguel Angel Toledo, the Faizana Professor of Zoroastrian Languages and Literature, will introduce our speaker for today. Professor Toledo.
Thank you very much. It is a great honor, a privilege, and an immense pleasure to introduce Professor Antonio Panaino. He is full professor of Iranian Studies at the University of Bologna at the Department of Cultural Heritage. He's a specialist of the pre-Islamic Iranian world, and Professor Panaino focuses on many different topics on the broad range of Iranian studies and also specifically Zoroastrian studies, among them religious and intellectual history of the Achaemenid and Sasanian empires with a strong philological approach through primary sources in Avestan, Old Persian, Pahlavi, and several other languages, with a careful attention for the intercultural phenomena involving the neighboring civilizations, such as the Babylonian, the Greek, the Indian, the Byzantine, and some others. After his doctoral thesis dedicated to the cult of the star Sirius Tishtria in Avestan and the sun and the moon in the Zoroastrian framework, he focused some of his researches on the origin of the demonization of the planets and on the development of the Iranian uranography. Further investigations concern the afterlife and the esoteric dimension of the sacerdotal functions within the Mazdean liturgic tradition. Among his many publications, he has hundreds of articles, a lot of very important books. I can show you just a few of them that I have right now on my hands. His last book, which you would find on the link that I just posted on the chat. This is a very important book, Ahura Mazda's Descent and the Direction of His Primordial Aggression. Also, A Walk to the Iranian Heavens that you have here. The compendium of articles, Sidera Viva, in 2 volumes, which is really excellent. One of the oldest books, but I consider it one of my favorites, Tessere il Cielo, that I use for a lot of my research, and many more articles, books, and publications. So please, thank you very much, Professor Panaino, for joining us today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Miguel. Just for the Persian friends who are here, I would like to recall that the booklet of mine concerning the planet is translated in New Persian, and also my manual on the history of Zoroastrianism is translated in New Persian. So I did this with the help of some of my Persian students who live in Tehran, and also in order to inform the Iranian, the Persian public in particular, of some developments in the history of the field. So in any case, I thank all of you, but in particular my colleagues of the University of Toronto, who were so kind to invite me, although in a mental, in a mēnōg, we will say Omidyar form on your screens, although I hope to come again to Canada and to Toronto, because you say Toronto and not Toronto as people in New York or in other parts of America, which is one in your continent. As I told, it is my favorite place. It's one of the most beautiful cities of America. And your university is so quiet, is so a pleasure. Your library also, the General Library of Toronto, is so important. And I recall that a colleague of mine, the late Umberto Eco, was inspired also in writing The Name of the Rose by your library. And he wrote many articles in which he underlined the function, the importance of the new organization, librarian organization, thinking on your main library in Toronto. So thank you for this opportunity, and also for this close link with Bologna and between our universities. Also, I'm very happy that Miguel is with you, and Enrico, who has been a pupil of mine with me, and Professor Gnoli, who is and they are, I know, working very, very hard in order to develop the subject of Iranian studies. So the subject I have chosen is well, a little bit peculiar, because normally scholars do not speak of this subject, sometimes also because they can be embarrassing. As I told Professor Tabakoli Targhi, I will touch sensible matters concerning the unconscious, sexuality, and some other aspects which are very, very relevant in the behavior of animals. What I would like to show you is the relevance of first of all, the mental dimension in the Zoroastrianism. So mentalism is one of the essential elements in the Zoroastrian religion. I will share with you a PowerPoint, so you can follow my text. So we start with Mazda, the name of Ahura Mazda, or Mazda, and already in the first part of his name, Mens, which became Mens with a Z, we have the element concerning the mind. Manas-da, which became Maz. Sorry, here we should have the sign of a nasalization. In any case, Ahura Mazda is the divinity who can create with the mind, in the mind. So it is sometimes translated as Lord Wisdom. So the mental dimension of God is very, very relevant. But also, when you observe the antagonism between Spenta mainiiu against angra mainiiu, both mainiius, normally translated spirits. I do not like the translation spirit, because spirit or Geist is too philosophical. And at a certain point, Spenta mainiiu has been translated in Christian, in Europe as Sanctus Spiritus, which is ridiculous because it has nothing to do with a Catholic or with a Christian concept. So we have Spenta mainiiu, who is the beneficent or increasing mental power, which is the mainiiu, and angra mainiiu is another mainiiu, so another mental power, who is hostile. So mainiiu is from man, the same verbal root, and in Vedic we have mainiiu, which is throne, passion. So here another mental element strongly emphasized. Spenta mainiiu and angra mainiiu are twin, and this became manifest in a dream of Ahura Mazda. So paradoxically, if we interpret Yasna 33 as a reference to a dream of Ahura Mazda perceived in a dream the two latent possibility of the thought. So one can think in a good way or in a bad way. And this way of thinking has a concrete, as a personal personification in these two powers, two primordial powers, spenta mainiiu against angra mainiiu. But they are mainiiu. They are mental powers or active way of thinking. Again, we have one of Amǝša Spentas, of Amǝša Spentas, Vohu manach, the good way of thinking, as manach in this case is a neutral stem, so is an object of thinking, who is Vahman or Vohuman in Middle Persian and New Persian. Against Vohu manach, we have akamanach, the bad way of thinking. And manas is a well-known concept even in Vedic. Mainiiu Spentas, so the most beneficent spirit, is again emphasized. And I recall, just for technical reason, that we have mantra from the same verbal root, to think, mantra as instrument of thinking, etymologically. And okay, then I underline in all the history of Zoroastrianism the triad, good thoughts, good deeds, good words. But of course, there is an antagonistic representation of this way, of this behavioral aspect. So you can have a bad thought, a bad deed, and bad words. But of course, from thinking, you have a derivation of all the rest of the possibilities in human activities. One of the aspects that frequently we do not emphasize is that the Yazatas, so the Zoroastrian divinities, are both mainiiauua and gaēieiia. We will reflect on these two Avestan adjectives, which are in Pahlavi translated as mēnōg and getig, or if you prefer a more a quasi-Persian spelling, mainiiu and geti. Yazatas, the divinities, are mental and etymologically gaēieiia, living, from Gaia, from the verbal root G, to live, while the demons are only mental. This is an important fact. So we have a mentalist dimension within the old Iranian framework. Ahura Mazda is connected with the mind. The two twins, the two primordial spirits are two strengths, thinking strength. Then you have the bad way and the good way of thinking, and so on. So the mental, the role of mind is foundational. And at a certain point, it is clear that the Yazatas must be both mental and living, so, or mainiiauua and gaēieiia can have very different meanings, but basically, etymologically, this is the starting point, but the demons are only mental. Why? Well, why? Because demons and Ahriman are antagonists of life. As the late Hans-Peter Schmidt underlined in many of his works, Ahriman and angra mainiiu do not properly exist. So their presence in the conflict, in the dimension, in the earthly dimension, is a negation. something like an antimatter. So when Ahriman is present, he is not, because what is existing is destroyed. So Ahrimanic creatures are aspermatic, are unseminal. They cannot generate proper beings. Their function is mortiferous, is criminal, is to destroy and kill life. This is one really relevant element in Zoroastrianism, because many scholars in history of religion, in comparative religions, who do not know really deeply the Zoroastrian tradition, just make the assumption that Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism are both dualist, and so it is more or less the same. This is very, very false, because we know that in Zoroastrianism, the mental dimension is complementary of the living and physical one. Is the demonic, the evil dimension, which is in the mind, and of course, with consequences in the living reality. Of course, in the Zoroastrian tradition, as it was in the Vedic period, we have the opposition between Asha and Druj, which in Vedic was Urta and Druh. So, true order, cosmic order against lie. And Ahura Mazda, who is on the top, is intrinsically good. But the two primordial twins, so Spenta mainiiu and angra mainiiu, are asked to make a choice. This is another element which I consider very important in Zoroastrianism, represented by the verbal root var, to take a decision, to make a choice. Very briefly, I have to recall that within Iranian studies, we had a little polemics. If var, so to make a choice, was to be considered connected with a free choice or just a compulsory choice, which was a priori. In my opinion, because the two mainiius are literally way of thinking, power of a mind, it is difficult to assume that they can be imagined without any complete freedom of thinking. In any case, this act of choice is important, because after the choice of the two mainiius, all humanity has to take a decision. We have to decide on which side we want to stay. So there is no radical opposition between spirit and body in Zoroastrianism, no derogative antagonism against the physical dimension. And also, this is another important point in Zoroastrianism. The creation was created good and perfect by Ahura Mazda. This is something which cannot be accepted in many other religions. So the extra cosmic presence of evil. Evil is not due to a mistake inside the creation, but evil enters completely from outside in the good creation. But we will see that the presence of Ahriman is very peculiar. So I come back to a concept I have anticipated. So the distinction between a mental and a living dimension. In Old Avestan, we have a manachia, mental, and astuant, which means literally having bones. Ast is like in Greek osteon. No, it's the same. And in Pahlavi, it is astomand. In Young Avestan, this terminology is a little bit changed. So manachia correspond to mainiiauua, which is literally again mental. You can recognize man, the verbal root, and gaēieiia connected with the root G or with the word Gaia, which means to live, the life, means etymologically living. Of course, what is mental can be spiritual, celestial, imaginary, and what is gaēieiia can be physical, material, and so on. So we have to look at the context in any case. But in Pahlavi, we have mēnōg and getig, or mēnōio, mainiiu, and getii, which are adjective and substantive. So we can speak of a mēnōg as a category, as a philosophical category. So the mēnōg is mental dimension or the spiritual dimension. And for instance, we used to distinguish the 12,000 years of the fight of between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, dividing them in two big periods, one of 6,000 years called mēnōg, and another one called getig. Although in reality, there is a dialectics between these two categories. Already in Avestan, the difference between what is mainiiauua and gaēieiia comes to characterize the existence, the life, Ahu. And there is no antagonism. These are two modalities of a being. There is no opposition. Normally, many religions try to focus on a contrast between a celestial or spiritual dimension on high and on an earthly, physical, dirty, negative dimension on the earth. For instance, Plato insists on this and say that the body, soma, is a sema, is a prison. Nothing of similar in the Zoroastrianism. A mental dimension isolated can be very dangerous. We will see that in the economy of a battle against the two principles, the living dimension, the physical dimension, will be strategically important. For instance, this is frequently not emphasized, but the army of Ahriman is only mental, is only mēnōg. Why? Because you know that Ahriman, at a certain point, after the first 3,000 years of the creation in its primordial state, went to a parliament, a parley, as two generals on the border of darkness and on the border of light, Ahura Mazda on one side, Ahriman on the other side, start to speak. And Ahura Mazda offered to angra mainiiu the opportunity to share the beauty of his kingdom. And Ahriman, who liked the creation of Ahura Mazda, refused. He also expressed, because he liked the creation, the desire to destroy it. Ahura Mazda, who already knew the answer, because Ahura Mazda is omniscient, say, okay, we make an agreement. And Ahriman, who is a little bit stupid, or given with post-knowledge, more precisely, accepts and says, okay, I accept to fight where? Into a limited space and into a limited time. So for this reason, Ahriman accepts to fight in the field chosen by his enemy. He has not understood that Ahura Mazda has created a kind of temporal pocket in the eternity and has limited the time. So Ahriman has only to accept this condition, and he does it. So this means that the fight will be not fought into an unlimited space and temporal dimension, because the Bundaism insists on this, quasi-anticipating modern physical doctrines about the universe. So the idea is that a fight into the eternal dimension of an unlimited universe will be never-ending. So when Ahriman accepts to fight within the creation, he has lost already. As a chess player starting with a black color and with some pieces already taken away from the checkboard. Why? Because Ahura Mazda is not included prisoner of a limited time. He stays outside. And he is not prisoner without the creation. But Ahura Mazda, as some of his divinities, can enter and exit from the universe, from the creation. But there is another very important element which normally we do not emphasize, because Ahriman sleeps for 3,000 years after the agreement. During these 3,000 years, Ahura Mazda modifies the creation from a purely mental dimension into a gaeic dimension, but this physical dimension, gaeic dimension, sleeps, is immobile. So we speak, it was Marie-Jeanne Mollet to focus on this aspect, saying we have a gaeic suspended in the mēnōg. But Ahriman cannot transform his negative creation from a mental condition into a parallel living dimension. Probably he would have some difficulties in doing this, but in any case, when Ahriman attacks the creation and he pierces the heaven, the sky, and enters the creation, he arrives with an army which is only mental. So we have three elements of inferiority. Ahriman is in the limited time, not Ahura Mazda. Ahriman is imprisoned in the creation. Ahura Mazda can stay on the top of it, entering only when it will be necessary, so at the end of the 12,000 years. But the army of Ahriman is only mental, not physical. Why? To have a physical dimension will be so important, because the physical dimension, in particular with the reference, the continuous references to the sexual drive, will push humanity to develop life against the desire of Ahriman, who wants to destroy completely life. This is the main target. So this implies that the mental dimension of evil is foundational. The action of Ahriman is basically mental. And of course, bringing mental disease and suffering is a way to destroy and erase the life. So it is interesting to observe that the Persian intellectuals or the Zoroastrians and mythographers of the antiquity were able to focus on, to realize some myth in which the behavioral condition, modalities of Ahriman and his creature correspond to a lot of mental diseases. Look, we start. When Ahura Mazda offers Ahriman the possibility to share the kingdom of light. Ahriman who likes the creation, so no way, I want to destroy completely, which is a sadistic form. I like something, and for this reason, because I want to kill, to destroy everything. First example. Second, when Mazda proposes the peace, Ahriman immediately starts to say, oh, if he wants to make peace with me, this means that he is a coward, that he is not capable to fight. So I have to destroy him because I am stronger. Also, this is another way of thinking, which is very well attested in neurotic behavior. So the way of interpreting the behavior of other person who try to be kind with us as a way to be or inferior, or they want to hide something against us. But we have to look another dramatic myth, which is normally never quoted, but it is attested, for instance, in the mēnōg, in the Revayat, in the mēnōg Krat, chapter 8, or in the Revayat, the Pahlavi Revayat to the Dadestani Denik. When Mazda develops his own creation, he emits light. It's an emanation of light. His semen is full of light, and from this light, all the creatures start to be created in a mēnōg form. And Ahriman, in the form of a frog, a stinky frog, he's described as awful, in order to reciprocate the creation, make an act of kun parts, a self-sodomy. The self-sodomy is very interesting and has nothing strictly to do with the masturbation, because in any case, the masturbation, as in the Indian tradition, can be generative, because the semen is emitted, is outside. But the kun marts is clearly a very violent form of concentration of the sexual drive on the person who is involved. So there is no sexual drive outside, directed to something else. He is incapable to love. He is incapable to take into consideration an emission. He is implosive. So this is a sexual act. This is interesting. So even Ahriman is given with a sexual drive, but this sexual drive is implosive. And so the negative creation, the dark creation of Ahriman is a reversed form of creation, is an implosive manifestation of his negative, completely negative power. It is interesting because I used to consult specialists of psychiatry, and we find in the manuals elements of psychotic way of thinking in which some patients desire to make this act on themselves. Of course, it is technically, physically impossible, but the fantasy, this kind of fantasy is strongly confirmed in the psychiatric analysis of very strongly disturbed persons. So it's interesting that this way of focusing the antagonist creation. So Ahriman donates. Ahriman is unable to donate. Mazda emits the light. Ahriman is copulating on himself, which is also a very horrible horrible image, and very violent, in which the main subject is the incapability to donate, to put something outside. It is the highest form of narcissism. I emphasized some years ago in Vienna for the anniversary of Freud that this is a true form of narcissism, because the poor Narcissus started to love his own image because he was punished by Apollon. Apollon was upset because Narcissus did not like a young lady who was protected by Apollon. So this is a malediction. It was a curse on him. So he is not responsible of his self-love. But Ahriman is. Unfortunately, our colleagues in psychoanalysis and psychiatry did not know Iranian mythology and did not use this example, which is much better than that of Narcissus. Okay, but negative and dramatically sick behavioral activities are well attested among persons who follow Ahriman. We start with the first couple of beings, Amǝša and Mashane, the two first human beings. They pass a century and more without any sexual interest. Why? Because they are devoted to Ahriman. And Ahriman impulse is against sexuality, because sexuality will develop life. So we are just in working with a pattern which is the opposite of Manichaeism and opposite with many other religious traditions. Here, the sexual drive is foundational for the creation and for the development of humanity. But people in the hands of Ahriman who follow the wrong way have no more interest in sexual life, and they do not copulate. But after 1 century and more, the getig, as a living force of nature, pushes them, and then they have an intercourse and they generate the first normally born couple of babies. But they are mad. They are strongly sick, mentally sick. And what they do? They kill the babies and they eat them. Well, eating the babies after their birth is a well-known mental criminal act. It is, there are chapters in the manuals of criminal psychiatry. It is a form of regression into a very primitive oral level, oralische Stufe in Freud, in which the parents refuse to be parents, and they want to re-introject their own creature. Unfortunately, it is a modality of madness, is a modality of criminal behavior, which the first couple, the first human couple, can put in action because they are in line with Ahriman. What is important is that after this event, Ahura Mazda modifies the beauty of the children so that Amǝša and Mashane can start to have children without eating them. So we again see that Ahura Mazda is doing his own best to enforce the Getic dimension with all its positive consequences, which insist on the development of life. But the sexual implication of the Getic dimension are visible in another myth. Now, you remember that we spoke of the agreement between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. So, Ahriman, at that point, after the agreement, when Ahura Mazda starts to sing the Ahumbar, one of the most important prayers of the Avesta, he falls asleep. Pad stardih in the Pahlavi text. So we have to imagine Ahriman like a long frog who is in a state between a nightmare and a dream. But for 3,000 years, he is blocked. He is there. And Ahura Mazda, in the meantime, can develop the creation from the mēnōg to the Getic condition. But at the end, Jech, the primordial whore, start to emphasize Ahriman. She invokes, our father, please, wake up, wake up. We have to aggress the creation of Ahura Mazda. We have to kill the primordial bull. We have to kill the primordial man, Gaio. We have to destroy the creation. And she, with all the demons, start to run, to move around the sleeping body of Ahriman. Ahriman start to awake, and he stands up. And at that point, Ahriman kisses Jech. In that moment, Jess has her menses. So this is interesting from the symbolical point of view, because the kiss of Ahriman is a sexual contro-initiation. Instead to be a form of fecundation, the kiss produces menses. And menses, according to the Zoroastrian tradition, represent the discharge of the ovulation. So this means that the lady cannot be pregnant in that period, and so that she is not ready for having children. So this is a kind of symbolic victory, which will be transmitted to all the women in the future. This is very important from the symbolical point of view. Also, we have to consider that Jech is a monster, is a demoness. And probably like Medusa, the fact that Ahriman kisses her in the face is not a kiss in the face, but probably we have to do with the image, as Ferenczi, one of the best pupil of Freud, wrote, in the case of Medusa, is a vagina dentata. So is the female sexual organ with the aspect of a face. And for this reason, men who saw Medusa were petrified, according to many interpretations of this myth. So we have Ahriman who kissed Jech, producing sterility. And at that point, Ahriman asks Jech, say, please, ask me what you want. Ahura Mazda, who is omniscient, as we know, he knows everything. He is looking from his side of the universe what is happening in the kingdom of darkness. And, well, the situation is dangerous because Jech could ask everything, could ask to be able to castrate, to kill all the men, to destroy life on the earth. But Ahriman, with the power of Maya, so he creates an illusion. And the body of Ahriman appears in the eyes of Jech as the beautiful body of Neriosan, So a very young, beautiful, sexy divinity. You have to imagine Brad Pitt of the better period, and he is naked in front of Jack, and Jack said, "Oh, wonderful! I want him." So look, in this way, Ahriman has turned a very risky situation into an advantage, because Jack, asking the sexual appeal on Neriosen, but also asking to be in connection, in a sexual connection with him, because she desired to be his wife, to be his mistress. Well, this has blocked the very risky situation that the humanity could be destroyed. So it is a very strong example of the way in which Ahura Mazda is using the sexual drive in order to confirm the power of life and the drive in order to enforce the process of reproduction of a human beings. Of course, this is a model of a behavioral model which we'll find in the living dimension, in the Getig dimension, a true realization. So we can say that Ahura Mazda is playing with the libido of Jack. He is trying to put in her the desire, which is part of the Getig character. So, going to the conclusion, we can say that in the Zoroastrian tradition, starting with the earliest period, the distinction between mental and living dimension is very important, because it is complementary in the economy of the project of Ahura Mazda. And that the mental dimension isolated is not per se in itself pure and fantastic. It can be very dangerous, because it is in the mind that evil ideas, criminal projects, or full fantasies can be elaborated and can be after realized. But the physical part of humanity, the living dimension, is a barrier against some form of madness, because in any case it can push humanity to preserve the life. So in any case, this was a way to presenting, to describing the evolution of human history, giving to the human bodily living reality a very important and prestigious role, which is, for some respect, very unique in the history of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Panaino, for this really interesting talk. Now we will have time for a few questions, so you can either put them on the chat or raise your hand, and of course we will moderate the session depending on the number. So any questions from the audience?
Yes, Miguel.
Yeah, please.
Hi.
Professor Pourchariati, please. You're muted, sorry. We cannot hear you.
Thank you so much for this really fascinating talk, I just have two quick questions from you. How would this relate to predetermination and freedom of choice, your conception?
Yeah.
And how does Mithra fit in your conception of Iranian religions? I mean, I know it's a big question.
Well, the problem, I had a long discussion with one of my best masters, who is Jean Kellens, whose idea was mostly that choice was not free. So that choice is a priori between one way of thinking which is good and one way of thinking which is bad. But this, in my opinion, is the way in which Zoroastrianism transformed and adapted itself in late antiquity. I think because he himself translated mainiiu as pensée pensant, thinking, thought. And then I say, if mainiiu is a pensée pensant, is an active way of thinking with respect to manas, which is a neutral, and that means the resultative aspect of the way of thinking, well, we can at least imagine that a way of thinking of a pensée pensant was free, because it is, or in any case, it was free in Ahura Mazda, because if Spenta mainiiu and angra mainiiu are the two twins generating during a dream of the highest God, this means that implicitly there was a defect in Ahura Mazda himself, because this is the problem of the origin of evil. Evil exists because something doesn't work perfectly into the scheme we attribute to God. So in this case, the origin of the chaos is into the freedom of the dream. This, for me, teaches that one can think in different ways, but also one can think, but one can also choose. So you can take your decision. And this action for humanity, in any case, was a model. Spenta mainiiu made a choice, and angra mainiiu made another one. We can also say, yes, but they were already good and bad. But now you have to observe all of that. And what do you want to do? So from the pragmatic point, it implies that humanity is free, and that humanity should, because it is given with mindfulness, with a thought, and this thought must take a direction, and the direction is in your freedom. This is clear in Zoroastrianism, because in Zoroastrianism your decision is essential, and this is the reason for which one has the kustig. The animals, you know that the Zoroastrians till today, they do not expose on the Tower of Silence the dogs, but they can put them with the sadrem, but not the kustig underground. But if by mistake you put a kustig on the dead body of a dog, you have to bring him on the Tower of Silence. Because in that moment, you have attributed him with the freedom of choice, with the freedom of conscience. So I think that in a way or the other, the act of var, to take a decision, to make a choice, cannot be completely a priori, but in a certain respect, there is a freedom of choice, because mainiiu is mainiiu, even from the Vedic point of way. It is a so strong intellectual is too much. It's a so way mental attitude in which, in a stubborn way, you want to go and to do something. But this means that there is you are involved in this direction. And this cannot be just a priori, or our human dignity will be strongly reduced. And this is not the aspect I can focus or emphasize in the Zoroastrian tradition. With regard to Mitra, well, Mitra as a divinity of the agreement, of the pact, of the who can guarantee the respect of the conditions, is implicitly a divinity who also protects the decision or the assumption. So Mitra is connected with the sense of responsibility. you are responsible of what you say in front of him. If what you are saying is a lie, you must know that you will be strongly punished because you have broken an agreement. And again, if you are not free to decide, how you can be taken as responsible of your behavior? You are responsible because you can freely take your decision in front of Mitra, in front of the divinity. So this is my way of imagining the situation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question, we will have time just for 2 questions, please. So Manek Bushbala, please.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Panaino, for trying to explain, this concept of evil, which is a very mysterious thing. Where does evil come from and all that? But on the other hand, considering that Zarathustra or Zoroaster, in his gathas, compositions, he presents in a rather simple way, that God, there's Ahura Mazda, created all life and everything. And then he has given these capabilities, of thinking and everything, and freedom of choice. So then it is the choice of the human being, now whether the human being may be healthy or may have a disease, but it is the choice of the human beings to take care of that diseases, like the doctors do that, right? So whereas now later on, this religion, according to what I listen to scholars, that the religion was adopted by the Median priests, of the Median kingdom. The Media was another kingdom in the Achaemenian times, And so now they may have infused some of their beliefs, which is also sometimes referred to as the younger Avesta, compared to Zarathustra's original Avesta. So is it not kind of possibly giving a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of Zarathustra's religion to say that, then now people can say, well, the devil made me do it, when you consider these other concepts, rather than, no, it is the responsibility of the human being to make the right choice or the wrong choice. And these are supposedly in the material realm, of the earthly realm, that good and evil and all these are coming about, right? If you have a knife discovered as a good thing to cut bread and all that, if someone uses the knife to kill someone, so there's no inherent good and evil in the spiritual or mental realm, but mental is a different aspect, of course. But it creates a concept that maybe Zoroastrianism is a dualism, rather than a monotheism. Does it not create that kind of impression?
Well, about the definition of monotheism, of dualism, the problem is to fix the categories. The problem is that many scholars, speaking of monotheism, were using a term without clarification. If we think that monotheism is the Islamic monotheism, for instance, right, I will say that even Christianity is not a monotheistic religion because there is a Trinity. And this is an objection which has been repeated by many philosophers from the Islamic side. And even in Judaism, the early Jewish religion presents texts in which, for instance, in Elephantina, in Upper Egypt, the Persian garrison worshipped Yahu, his wife, and the son. So is a divinity in which there is one God with his wife and a son, a monotheism? I think that Zoroastrianism is a Mazdeism, in the sense that Ahura Mazda is the most important divinity, with certain characters we can find in a monotheism, but there are many other divinities connected with the old Iranian past. Dualism is an ethical, I use in this sense a pattern which my professor in Rome, Gerardo Gnoli, used. So speaking of kind of religious monotheism, but I use monotheism in a very not dense meaning. with including all the aspects in which you can observe elements belonging to polytheism and other variations, but in which the ethical opposition between Asha and Druj is essential. In this respect, of course, the freedom of choice, I think it was important. Although in the late Sasanian period, the role of Ahura Mazda and of Ahura Mazda and Ahriman was different with respect to the Gathas, because in the Gathas we have Ahura Mazda on the top, and below we have the two mainiiu who are one against the other. Right. In the later sources, Spenta mainiiu is practically evaporated. It doesn't play in any significant role. And in some sources, you have Zurvan, who is put on the top as a new semi-monotheistic power who must explain the origins of the other. So there is a strong tendency and also a debate within the Zoroastrian religion. I insist to say there are contradictions, yes. There are different points of view, yes. But are there historical millenarian religions attested in different periods under different kingdoms with different intellectuals taking a strong role within them, which do not show contradiction and oppositions? It's impossible. Also, it's a positive fact. We have different ideas. We have to accept that the history of Zoroastrianism is a history of discussions, of controversies, of polemics, of problems, of different points of view. For instance, what I've tried to do in the last years was to show, look, Zoroastrianism started with the idea that the hell was eternal and that the punishment was eternal. At a certain point, probably in the late Sasanian period, after the Mazdakite revolution, the Zoroastrians started to incorporate doctrines coming from the Christian Nestorian background. So the idea of the apocatastasis, the idea that a river of fire will burn the hell and will purify everybody. But this is not an Iranian or an Indian idea. This is a Christian idea from a theological point of view, which in turn depends on Greek and Egyptian doctrine. So it's the debate, the humanity. Humanity happily does not only fight in internal violent battles, but people can also exchange ideas. And in antiquity, I think people and priests did not work in a way as we can do today. Oh, I have read a book by Karl Jaspers. I like his idea, and then I will take his idea in my philosophy, making the quotation. In late antiquity, people were living together. We are speaking. We are speaking of their vision of life or of the afterlife. And at a certain point, certain Christian ideas about the eternity of life, the liberation of everybody, found in the Zoroastrian sensibility a very attractive acclimatation, in the sense that the Zoroastrianism had already incorporated the Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle, so the idea of the good intermediate point. So it is impossible that a good divinity can punish persons for a sin committed in history for an eternal time. Second, there is a philosophical reason behind the purification of everything and on the destruction of hell. Because, and this comes again from the Christian philosophy, but was known in Iran. If the hell will be eternal, this means that Ahriman will be eternal. So this means that the victory of God will not be complete. There will remain a little part of the universe in which Ahriman will still be the king. So if God is God in all the universe, Ahriman must be completely destroyed, suspended. It is the philosophical interpretation given in the later Zoroastrian tradition, and all the people must be saved, because you cannot put them into a prison, because in this prison you will still have a little empire of evil. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have very few minutes for a... sorry. Yeah, for our last question. That was the point now. So please, Sasha Sadiatsko, please. Can you?
Thank you so much. Good evening, Professor. Thank you for a very entertaining lecture as always. So my question is, how would you say these theological, philosophical ideas of good and evil, of mentality and body, are connected to purity laws that are practiced by Zoroastrians?
Well,
is there a connection at all?
Well, the idea of the mental and living aspect of life is connected in the sense that the Zoroastrian tradition is in a culture in which the ritual dimension was very strong, played a certain role. Of course, more philosophical is the attitude, less important is the obsession for the physical or the technical purity. But we know, when we read the Merangestan or other Zoroastrian texts, that the purity laws were strongly relevant. And for instance, we have to make distinction between the lay person and the priest, or the priest families. According to the proximity to the ritual sacrifice, you have to respect, or you can negotiate with the rules. And this is clear in the history of Zoroastrianism. The difference between mēnōg and gaēieiia is an intellectual and theoretical distinction, which is really relevant in order to understand the way of thinking, the history of the world, and the reasons of a fight. So it is on a more speculative level. Presently, Zoroastrian people, if you ask them strictly about mēnōg and gaēieiia, they will not follow you, because it is a too philosophical, speculative dimension. But this is also evident in many religions. When you touch very sensitive, for instance, if you ask a Christian, Catholic, Lutheran, Calvinist about the so-called economy of the theandrical complex, which is a very incomprehensible formulation to say which is the relation between the human and divine elements in the body and in the soul of Jesus, you will probably produce the collapse of hundreds of Christians. When I put the question in my classes, nobody is able to answer, but frequently even persons who pretend to be catechists, so who want to teach and to explain, because it is a very highly speculative, philosophical and theological dimension. The purity law are closer to common life, and you can also are identitarian. So people who follow them feel to be part of a community. But also these laws can be derogated. For instance, today, you know that theoretically the wife of a priest, of a Zoroastrian priest, should come from a priestly family. This was the rule. Now, the Zoroastrian priests in Mumbai, for instance, can marry women coming from Zoroastrian purely Zoroastrian families, but no more exclusively from a priestly family. Why? Because rich women of priestly family do not want to marry a priest, because to be the wife of a priest is so demanding, is an enormous responsibility to wake up in the night, to wash the sacred bull, to clean the animals, be careful with all the purity law of the husband. So it is a drama. And for families of lower social level, it is a promotion. It is a social promotion. And this is another, so it's a sociological problem. The other one is more a theological and theoretical dimension. So we have to combine the two aspects and consider religions as phenomena of living being, not just as textual speculation. Both sides are important. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, Professor Panaino, for this wonderful talk and for answering all the questions. And please, Professor Tavakolita-Gui.
Professor Panaino, thank you for your amazing, enthusiastic, and highly persuasive lecture. It has been a pleasure having you joining us virtually, and we look forward to having you here in person in the near future.
Inform me, I'm ready to fly.
All right, let's do it.